Dusty May says, we obviously have one of the best alumni bases in the world, and it's a university that really supports athletics. Probably over the last year, our roles and responsibilities as coaches changed and evolved. I probably spent about 25 to 30% of my time on NIL, recruiting donors, giving access to our program, doing anything we could to provide opportunities for our players. It is what it is. I've learned to enjoy it. It's not going away, and I'd love for our players to be taken care of as much as possible and rewarded for the work that they put in. I think Ward Manuel also said that Dusty expressed to him during their meetings that he wants to be a partner in the NIL. He doesn't want to just sit there and rely on the athletic department and, and whine about what he's not getting. He wants to take ownership in that, which I think was important. I just got off the phone before we started recording here with Ken Levica, who's the play-by-play voice of FAU. And I said, how did he keep that roster intact from the Final Four run to this year, where then they become the second winningest team in FAU history? And he said he told those guys, one, they were transparent with him on who was tampering. And, they said, hey, we have options. He understood that. He said he sat down in the spring and the summer, and he told those guys that he will do anything and everything he possibly can to make sure they have the most opportunities with NIL, any opportunity that they want. There wasn't a hand he didn't shake. There wasn't a donor he didn't meet. There wasn't a call he didn't put in to put his guys in position. He's, Chris, you wrote the story, but he's going to be relentless. He's going to be relentless in everything. And I think that was really encouraging to hear. 25 to 30% seems high, but he's willing to do whatever. And by the way, 25 to 30%, but we're talking about a guy that's constantly working. So he's still doing a lot in other areas, but I thought that was pretty interesting to hear.
Yeah, basketball junkie. You don't think I offended him with that question, do you? With the basketball junkie thing?
No, I think he got a kick out of it.
He did get a kick out of it, but it was an interesting choice of words, and that's what he is. He's like he said, I don't have any hobbies, and in that respect, he kind of sounded like Jim Harbaugh when he said, "I'm a jackhammer, right? I have no hobbies. I wake up every morning starving to get better." And I'm like, okay, you got that. And what did Jim Harbaugh do, guys, on the NIL trail? He was out front for Empower, and he was going around the country, and he was trying to raise money, and he wanted to be the face of it. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, because I don't think he had the full backing of the athletic department at that point. I think he does now. And I think that Dusty May will too, and he wanted to make sure of that before he took the job. So he heard what he needed to hear when Ward Manuel went down there. And give credit to Ward Manuel, there were some people that wanted to wait and said, hey man, he just got bounced from the tournament, let's wait a couple days. And said, no, I got to get my guy, he's in demand, let's go get him. And he did, and I give him credit for that. So it was clear that Dusty May wanted to be here, and Dusty May kind of made that clear as well, didn't he, when he said, I knew from the outset that Michigan would be one of the jobs that I would really want to explore. And even though everybody at Louisville just assumed, hey, we're better than Michigan and so on and so forth, and we got better basketball, and which is, again, is debatable if you look at the records over the last 30 years or so, right? Barring the lost decade there of Michigan basketball with Tommy Amaker and Brian Ellerby, Michigan basketball is right up there with anybody. So I would agree with Anthony that, hey, when you look at the tournament wins under John Beilein and Juwan Howard, at one point over a decade, they had more tournament wins than anybody, even the Blue Bloods. So yes, you can win here if you do it right, if you're the right guy, if you get the right fits. It starts with the basketball coach. They definitely got the right fit there.
Yeah, and when it comes to NIL too, I mean, something, we talk about this with modern coaches all the time, is that you're not just the X's and O's guy that gets on the plane once in a while, and goes and sees a recruit. Like, you are constantly, recruiting. You're recruiting your own roster now. I think in NIL, you're almost somewhat like a politician, where you have to go out and be the driving force behind generating donations and shaking hands with people and making those types of connections. And again, everything that we've heard about Dusty May, and everything that like Clayton, what you're working on, I'm sure will illustrate that this is a guy that is 110% in every aspect of the job. So again, and I've said it before, this is probably as close to a home run hire as you can get. It's the best hire that Michigan could have made. He was the top candidate on the market. And it doesn't guarantee success. There could always be pitfalls. There could always be something that happens and comes out of left field. But, when you just look at, him as an evaluator, him as a tactician, him as a fundraiser, him as a culture guy, I mean, it just seems like it's A++ in every single category. So Now, like I said before, all of the work begins. You're going to find out, what his chops are in NIL and recruiting the portal and recruiting high school guys right away, because there are at least maybe 6 or 7 spots up for grabs, maybe more on this roster as they build for next year. So, the thing about having a guy like this, like an Energizer Bunny type of guy, is that he's going to be tested in pretty much every phase of this job right away. And I think that's fascinating. And I think that when you look at the challenge ahead, I think Michigan got the right guy in that regard too.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how he balances wanting to do well in year one, but also getting guys maybe that are a little bit younger that can be a foundation for the future. And as he said, being good in year one is part of the build because you can sell year one. But, we'll see what exactly they are on the floor this year. But either way, like just following each and every move is going to be interesting. And those moves are going to include staff changes. His head assistant or lead assistant coach, I should say, at Florida Atlantic, Kyle Church, was the interim head coach. He was named that by the AD as soon as Dusty May stepped down and took the Michigan job. He will not be the head coach for Florida Atlantic full-time. He was a candidate, but they're giving it to a Baylor assistant whose name escapes me. That makes things interesting because I think you could see Kyle Church come over, and it will be intriguing to see what his staff looks like. Will it be, a mixture? He kind of alluded to this. It will be a mixture of FAU guys and new coaches. Could he retain a guy like Sadie Washington if he doesn't get the UDM job? It looks like he's a finalist for that. I believe it's Todd Abernathy as well, has been with him for a long time. Is an FAU assistant, could come over. But your guys' thoughts on what he needs to do? Does it need to be geographical with recruiting? Do you need to have Midwest guys like a Sadie? I think would be great. What would you look for in your staff if you're?
I would love to have Sadie back. Honestly, it's funny that all the blame that the assistant coaches got for the failures of this administration. That it wasn't fair. If you look at the NIL aspect of it, I don't remember seeing Juwan Howard anywhere. When it came to trying to raise money for NIL, and so I'm not saying that it was all his fault. But I think there is certainly room for improvement, and that Dusty May will do that. We will have a hot board up shortly, guys. As soon as this podcast is done, I am finishing that up. But there are several names that I can think of that I have been told to watch. And I believe Dusty May said in his press conference that it'll probably be a mixture of old guys and new guys. Yep. So that'll be something to watch. There's no question that he'll bring some FAU guys with him, but he's also smart enough to know that if you have a guy familiar with the program and some of the recruits that they're bringing in, that's not going to be a bad thing either. So that's why I could see a Sadie Washington sticking around. And I know he's passed up on some opportunities to stay as a Michigan assistant. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have ambition. And I want to make that very clear. There are family considerations, and that's what he told me a few years back, that, sometimes that trumps your personal ambition. And it doesn't mean that you can't be successful in the role that you have, but there are no guarantees, especially at a place like UDM, fellas, where it's hard to win, especially in this day and age. So we'll see how that plays out, but keep an eye on that. I have no doubt, like he said, that they will be great fits in terms of teachers and students of the game and everything else. So I trust his judgment, and I do believe he will listen to guys like John Beilein and other coaches he respects when it comes to filling out those staffs.
Yeah, and with Dusty May too. I mean, I know at Florida Atlantic he was a first-time head coach, but he had before that 15 years of assistant coaching experience, and even more than that when you talk about some of the grad assistant work that he was doing. So has a network of guys, even if it's not just his FAU guys. He knows who's qualified. He knows who to look for. Something I would advocate for, if John Beilein is in your ear, Luke Yaklich is out there and available. You talk about wanting to be a lead at both ends of the floor. I think that would be a phone call to at least make. I don't know if Yaklich would come back to Michigan or not, but there's a lot of options out there. But keeping it somewhat intact with both what he knows, and then if a guy like Sadie sticks around, then you've got this nice blend of the old and the new. And again, there were problems operationally the last few years with what went on under Juwan Howard, but I certainly don't think that Sadie Washington was part of that. And he's a guy, if anything, that was probably keeping the peace behind the scenes. So in terms of a little bit of continuity, if you're trying to re-recruit some of the guys that were here already, I think that would be a nice play. But we'll see what happens. I have no doubts that he'll put a good staff together in year one to help him hopefully lead this team to the leap that he hopes it takes in year one.
Another name I'll mention is Darius Nichols, who's a guy who both John Beeline mentioned the other day on the radio on the Huge Show, and a guy that Dusty May mentioned during his press conference as well. He's a head coach at Radford right now, but they coached together for a long time at Louisiana Tech. In Florida, he's a head coach. We just saw Jake Diebler take a low major head coach and make him an assistant coach at Ohio State. So like you said, AB, like there are guys all over the country that Dusty May has not only worked with, but guys that, like I mentioned during COVID and other points, and he said it too in response, I think, Chris, to one of your questions the other day. It's like, or it might have been somebody else's question, but like he'll listen to a podcast or he'll see something and he'll just start calling whoever it is that said, or, you know, that he saw something that stood out to him, and he will network with them and he will learn from them. So he has a lot of connections that could help him in this staff building process. And he talked about that helping him in the transfer portal process too, because it's like speed dating. But if you have a lot of connections around the country, you can get to learn and get to know, you know, what these kids are like. So a lot of moves will be made in the coming days.